The Sino-Russian border conflicts were a series of intermittent skirmishes between the Qing dynasty, with assistance from the Joseon dynasty of Korea, and the Tsardom of Russia by the Cossacks, in which the latter tried and failed to gain the land north of the Amur River with disputes over the Amur region. The hostilities culminated in the Qing siege of the Cossack fort of Albazin and resulted in the Treaty of Nerchinsk in 1689, which gave the land to China. Background: the southeast corner of Siberia south of the Stanovoy Mountains was twice contested between Russia and China. Hydrologically, the Stanovoy Mountains separate the rivers that flow north into the Arctic from those that flow south into the Amur River. Ecologically, the area is the southeastern edge of the Siberian boreal forest, with some areas good for agriculture. Socially and politically, from about 600 AD, it was the northern fringe of the Chinese Manchu world. Various Chinese and Manchu-like states would claim sovereignty, build forts and collect tribute when they were strong enough. There were posts at Haishanwai, Boli, D-Ren on the lower Amur, and Tir above Nikolisk on Amur. In 1643, Russian adventurers spilled over the Stanovoys, but by 1689 they were driven back by the Qing. In 1859 the area was annexed by Russia and quickly filled up with a Russian population. Qing perspective 1639 to 1643 campaign led by Mancos against the indigenous rulers of the region. December 1639 May 1640 First battle, the natives and the Qing. Battle of Gwalior, between two regiments of Manchu and a detachment of 500 Solondors led by the Solon event leader Bombogor, while the second native leader Bardachi kept neutral. September 1640 Second battle, the natives and the Qing. Battle of Yaksa, between the natives and the Mancos. May 1643 Third battle, the native tribes submitted to the Qing Empire. 1643 to 1644 Vasily Poyarkow winter 1643 spring 1644 a detachment of a Russian expedition led by the Cossack Vasily Poyarkow explored the stream of the Jinkiri River, present-day Zaire, and the Amur rivers. 1649 to 1653 Yerofey Khabarov 1650 to 1651 occupation of the Dors Fort Albazin by Khabarov after subduing the Dors led by Albazin. The Russian conquest of Siberia was accompanied by massacres due to indigenous resistance to colonization by the Russian Cossacks, who savagely crushed the natives. The Russian Cossacks were named Luocha, after demons found in Buddhist mythology, by the Amur natives because of their cruelty towards the Amur tribes people, who were subjects of the Qing. March 24, 1652 Battle of Ashonsk, 1654 to 1658 Onufry Stepanov. March to April 1655 Siege of Kamar. 1655 Russian Tsardom has established a military governor of the Amur region. 1657 Second Battle of Shahodi. 1654 to 1658 the Sino-Korean alliance's expeditions against Russians. In the following operations significant Korean forces were included into Manchu-led troops. The campaigns became known in Korean historiography as Nasi and Jengbel. January 1654, the first time a Korean contingent arrived to join a Manchu army near Ning'uta. July 1654, Battle of Hutong between a joint Korean-Manchu army of 1,500 men led by Byonggup against 400 to 500 Russians. 1658, big warships capable of fighting Russian ships were built by Han Chinese shipbuilders for the Qing forces. Sahuda's Qing fleet from Ning'uta, including a large Korean contingent led by Shin Yu, sails down the Sungari into the Amur, and meets Onufry Stepanov's smaller fleet from Albazin. In a naval battle in the Amur a few miles downstream from the mouth of the Sungari, the 11-ship Russian flotilla is destroyed, and Stepanov himself dies. 1685 to 1687. The Albazin Jaghesa campaign. Former Ming loyalist Han Chinese troops who had served under Zhang Chenggong and who specialized at fighting with rattan shields and swords were recommended to the Kangxi Emperor to reinforce Albazin against the Russians. Kangxi was impressed by a demonstration of the techniques and ordered 500 of them to defend Albazin under Hou, a former Coxing follower, and Lin Xingqiu, a former general of Wu. These rattan shield troops did not suffer a single casualty when they defeated and cut down Russian forces traveling by rafts on the river, only using the rattan shields and swords while fighting naked. May to July 1685. The Siege of Albazin. The king used former Ming loyalist Han Chinese naval specialists who had served under the Zhang family in Taiwan. In the Siege of Albazin, the Russians were fought against by the Taiwan-based former soldiers of Coxing. July to October 1686, the Siege of New Albazin. See also Outer Manchuria. Thereupon he ordered all our marines to take off their cloths and jump into the water. Each wore a rattan shield on his head and held a huge sword in his hand. Thus they swam forward. The Russians were so frightened that they all shouted, "Behold, the big cap Tartars!" Since our marines were in the water, they could not use the firearms. Our sailors wore rattan shields to protect the heads so that enemy bullets and arrows could not pierce them. Our marines used long swords to cut the enemy's ankles. The Russians fell into the river, most of them either killed or wounded. The rest fled and escaped. Lin Xingqiu had not lost a single marine when he returned to take part in besieging the city. Written by Yang Haichai, who was related to Marquis Lin, a participant in the war. Russian perspective. This section retells the story from the Russian side. The sources, for the most part, are Forsyth, Lincoln and March. Russian expansion into Siberia began with the conquest of the Khanate of Sibir in 1582. By 1643 they reached the Pacific at Irkutsk. East of the Yenisei River there was little land fit for agriculture, except Oria, the land between the Stanovoy Mountains and the Amur River, which was nominally subject to the Manchus. The Manchus had recently re-established their authority in the area and were just beginning the conquest of China. The land was populated by some 9,000 Dors on the Zayu River, 14,000 Dutchers downstream and several thousand Tungusianiks toward the river mouth. The first Russians to hear of Doria were probably Ivan Moskvitin and Maxim Perfilev about 1640. 1643–46, Poyakov. In 1643 Vasily Poyakov traveled from Yakutsk south to the Zayu River. He then sailed down the Amur River to its mouth and then north along the Okhotsk coast, returning to Yakutsk 3 years later. 1649–50, Khabarov. In 1649 Yerofey Khabarov found a better route to the Upper Amur and quickly returned to Yakutsk, where he recommended that a larger force be sent to conquer the region. 1650–53, Khabarov again. He returned the same year and built winter quarters at Albazin at the northernmost point on the river. Next summer he sailed down the Amur and built a fort at Ashonsk, probably near present-day Khabarovsk. Again there was fighting and the natives called in the Manchu overlords. On the 24th of March 1652, Ashonsk was unsuccessfully attacked by a large Qing force. As soon as the ice broke up, Khabarov withdrew upriver and built winter quarters at Kurmask. In the spring of 1653 reinforcements arrived under Dmitry Zinoviev. The two quarreled. Khabarov was arrested and escorted to Moscow for investigation. 1653–58, Stepanov. Onufriy Stepanov was left in charge with about 400 to 500 men. They had little difficulty plundering the natives and defeating the local Qing troops. The king responded with two policies. First, they ordered the local population to withdraw, thereby ending the grain production that had attracted the Russians in the first place. Second, they appointed the experienced General Sahuda as the garrison commander at Ning'uta. In 1657 he built in more than 40 ships at the village of Ula. In 1658 a large Qing fleet under Sahuda caught up with Stepanov and killed him and about 220 Cossacks. A few escaped and became freebooters. 1658–65, No Man's Land. By 1658 the Chinese had wiped out the Russians below Nerchinsk, and the deserted land became a haven for outlaws and renegade Cossacks. In 1660 a large band of Russians was destroyed. They had some difficulty pursuing the Cossacks since their own policy had removed most of the local food. In the 1670s the Chinese attempted to drive the Russians away from the Okhotsk coast, reaching as far north as the Amur River. 1665–1689, Albazin. In 1665 Nikifor Chernigovsky murdered the voivoda of Ilimsk and fled to the Amur and reoccupied the fort at Albazin, which became the center of a petty kingdom which he named Jakso. In 1670 it was unsuccessfully attacked. In 1672 Albazin received the Tsar's pardon and was officially recognized. From 1673 to 1683 Manchu forces were tied up suppressing a rebellion in the south. In 1682–1684 a voivoda was appointed by Moscow. In 1685 the Manchus, now freed from the wars, invested the fort which surrendered on liberal terms. Most of the Russians withdrew to Nerchinsk, but a few joined the Manchus, becoming the Albazin Cossacks at Peking. The Chinese withdrew from the area, but the Russians, hearing of this, returned with 800 men under Alexei Albazin and reoccupied the fort. From June 1686, the fort was again besieged. Either or. At the time less than 100 defenders were left alive. Treaties. In 1689, by the Treaty of Nerchinsk, the Russians abandoned the whole Amur country including Albazin. The frontier was established as the Amur River and the Stanovoy Mountains. In 1727 the Treaty of Qing confirmed and clarified this border and regulated Russo-Chinese trade. In 1858, almost 2 centuries after the fall of Albazin, by the Treaty of Agun, Russia annexed the land between the Stanovoy Mountains and the Amur. In 1860, with the Convention of Beijing, Russia annexed the Primory down to Vladivostok, an area that had not been in contention in the 17th century. See Amur acquisition.